I want to bring in former Chief of Staff to former Vice President Mike Pence, Mark Short. Mark, thanks for being with us.
Andrew, thanks.
The West Wing is a really small place. People who take tours and visitors are always surprised by the narrow halls, the small rooms. I mean, it's, 18th century Washington.
It
right?
is.
Were you ever aware of David Pecker of the National Enquirer having meetings like this in the Oval Office and in the White House, talking to the president about, is Karen okay? Is she keeping quiet? Yeah, she's okay.
No,
We've got
I
our
was
best writers
certainly not
with
aware of those meetings, but it is a small place. At the same time, it's a very busy place, and I think, in particular with President Trump, there was a lot more traffic, perhaps, than is normal. There were fewer guardrails about what sort of meetings would happen or not happen. So, to not be aware of every meeting there is not unusual.
Of course, Mike Pence, the vice president, former vice president, your boss came up and, January 6th in particular, but it was actually a continuum of pressure by Donald Trump, by all accounts, January 6th investigating committee, by your own account, to pressure him not to go ahead and certify the election. And this came up in the Supreme Court argument today in an interesting way. We talked to the lawyers about it, but the issue was the pressure on the vice president an official act, or was that a private act, which was part of politics? But the lawyers can determine that, and it may now go back to another, to the judge, to Judge Chutkan to hold hearings on that. But tell me about that continuum, about the pressure on Mike Pence.
Well, it's certainly, I think a lot of people focus on the day of January 6th, but this was a weeks-long effort. I think ever since the Electoral College met on December 14th, from that point on, I think those who are looking to overturn the election results only had one last chance, and that was the events of January 6th. But, I'm not the lawyer. I do think it's somewhat of a gray area because the vice president's role is a constitutional role on that day of January 6th. It is official. But I also think at that point, former President Trump was not listening to White House counsel. The advice he was getting for those conversations was with campaign counsel and those that were not official. And so I think it's an interesting gray area for other lawyers to determine.
And, of course, the law that we now follow for the vice president to have sole authority over at least, creating the certification, once it's done, of the electoral count, came up after a previous election in the 19th century was determined by an outside commission, and that's how President Hayes became president.
Yeah, the Electoral Count Act was a result of the election of 1876 right. and was statutory. But I think it's fair to say that none of our founders or those in the beginning of our republic ever thought that any one person could determine the results of the election, and that's the way we've been for 250 years.
And just very quickly, that whole issue of what's official and what's not official involving Vice President Pence, that's a key argument. Joyce Vance, who was with us also, we were talking about this earlier during the argument. This is a key argument that is going to be pursued by the prosecutor.
It is. It's very important because when we're talking about the scope of what's in the indictment, what's chargeable conduct, and in essence, we hear Michael Dreeben talking with the court saying, look, here's the bare minimum that I can live with. If this evidence, and he included, by the way, the pressure campaign on the vice president, along with efforts to influence the Justice Department, and told the justices, at a minimum, if I can't charge this because you deem it's official conduct, I'm still entitled to use it as evidence of Donald Trump's knowledge and state of mind.
So it's intent. So it could still be part of the case, but not one of the charges.
The special counsel would certainly like to include that as part of the charged conduct. But if they can't, I think that they've very clearly said in both the briefs and in argument today that they'll use it as evidence.
Chris?
Mark, it's Chris Jansing, and that was just asked in court of David Pecker, do you have any bad feelings or ill will toward the defendant? And Pecker says, on the contrary, I felt that Donald Trump was my mentor. He helped me throughout my career. And he had actually talked about the information, the front page stories that Donald Trump and people close to him provided. True or not, they provided him information that sold newspapers, whether it was at your grocery checkout or whether it was in your local Walmart. I mean, arguably, Donald Trump is someone, certainly as president, who put a lot of people in the White House, including your former boss, Vice President Pence. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who have found a line or maybe at least some people who have found the lines. Certainly yours found his on January 6th. David Pecker has found his now with this agreement and his testimony. But is that what is happening here, that Donald Trump, like a lot of people, helps folks out because he's in a position of power, whether as, the king of New York, as he liked to think of himself, or president of the United States? Or is there something about Donald Trump and the loyalty that people seem to have for him and show for him that is unique to him?
Chris, I would probably share some of those sentiments in the sense that before I was Vice President, Chief of Staff, I was President Trump's Director of Legislative Affairs in the White House and worked more directly for him. And I am proud of the record of the administration and believe that he was great to me. He was great to my family, to be honest with you. But I think that the events of January 6th were such that he asked the Vice President to put loyalty to the president over his loyalty to the Constitution. And I think that we are a rule of law, it's not a rule of men. And I think that is foundational to what we are as a republic. And so I think that that is a dividing line, perhaps, for me. But at the same time, I don't think it would erode, perhaps, for some Republicans and conservatives' affection for what was accomplished during the administration. But I do think it's foundational. For conservatives, you should put rule of law first.